I've been with Genesis Research for over 2 years now, but prior to that, I spent 28 years in pharma. So a lot of what you're going to be hearing today is my experience in pharma, as well as my insights now that I'm in consulting. So the topic for today's discussion is stakeholder validation of evidence generation plans to achieve optimal access. Firstly, a thank you from our hosts, Genesis Research. Genesis Research is an end-to-end health economics and outcomes research and RWE consulting group. As a client, I worked with Genesis Research. Now I work for Genesis Research. We have a very agile platform for engagement, and please stop by our booth and we can tell you a little bit more. Market Access Transformation specializes in developing agile technology platforms to enable life sciences companies to gather insights from key stakeholders. In May of last year, Market Access Transformation became part of Genesis Research. So let's dive into the topic at hand. What I'm going to be covering in the next couple of minutes is what is an evidence generation plan? Why do we need one? Why do we need to validate our evidence generation plan? And what difference does it make? Approaches to stakeholder validation of evidence generation plan, a quick case study based on the time constraints, and then some key takeaways. From this point onwards, I'm going to be just calling EGPs rather than saying evidence generation plan. All right, so what is an evidence generation plan? So lots of information on this slide here, but what's really important to understand is an EGP presents and addresses diverse evidence requirements across multiple stakeholders, multiple markets or geographies, and across the product life cycle. When done well, an evidence generation plan or bits and pieces of what's important from an evidence generation perspective should be discussed way early in the drug development process. Now, the idea for an EGP is not to just compile the needs from an evidence perspective across the globe. The idea is to also understand what is the research question which is at hand, and what's the best methodology to answer that research question. So it's really important to go deeper into the appropriate data elements which are needed to answer that research question. So an EGP, when done well, again, is just not about the strategy and the tactics, but the approach to answer and deliver on those tactics. When you compile all of this together in an EGP, or sometimes referred to as IEGP, is when you get efficiency and effectiveness, because you then have a very good understanding at the enterprise level in terms of where the data gaps are and what the strategies and tactics are to address those data gaps. So I'm sure that many people within this room have had experience in pulling together functional plans and EGPs. We'll talk a little bit more later. Now, why do we even need to put EGPs in place? So EGPs support the development of a robust evidence package. Many of the people here in this room are probably supporting European markets. Every market has a different need. There's a global strategy, there's a regional strategy in place to make sure that you get reimbursement and market access, and you're delivering a reimbursable file. What's important is to really look at the evidence package from the perspective of the payer or the healthcare decision maker, from the perspective of understanding the disease, quantifying the unmet need, as well as establishing the product value. So if you think from an access decision maker perspective, what's really important is to help them understand what is the place in therapy for the product you're going to be bringing to the market. What is the true unmet need from the perspective of the payer, and what is the safety and efficacy, as well as the real world effectiveness of the product when it's brought to the market. Lastly, once the product is already in the market or at launch, it's really important to differentiate from whatever the standard of care is in the market. So when all of this is done in early stages of development, and you iterate on it based on insights which you're gathering, that's when you deliver a reimbursable file or you facilitate optimal access. Now, there are components that feed into EGP where stakeholder validation matters. And when I say stakeholder validation, it could be stakeholders from a payer perspective as well as from a clinician perspective. So in early stages of development, when you're working with new product planning, you start putting together a target product profile. You come up with the best case and the base case situations. Then you come up with your aspirational value proposition based on what is desired to get a reimbursable file to the market. Functional teams within pharma then put their own plans. It's all consolidated in an EGP, and then you go deeper and you think about exactly how to deliver against that EGP. So this, again, is a build which you start all the way from TPP set in early stages of development. Where do we need to get stakeholder validation? At all stages of this whole process. Stakeholder validation, when done in early stages, when you have a TPP, you can get input and insights from stakeholders to be sure that the delta you may be thinking about, which is going to be important to get optimal access, it can be delivered and should be delivered. So in early stages, you would do stakeholder validation, and as you build and become much more granular in your plan, you get the insights and you again build the insights in your evidence plan to be sure that you are providing a relevant data package when the product comes to market. Now, this is just an example, a pseudo-hypothetical example, I would say, of what happens when you have an optimal evidence package, and how do you achieve optimal access for that package. So as you can see from the screen here, I don't have a pointer, I think. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to use the pointer here. But in this pseudo-hypothetical case, it's actually a real product, and I've tried to blind it. In this situation, essentially, they were very successful in getting registration, both from an EMA as well as FDA perspective. They got really positive HTA appraisals across multiple different markets. But if you look at the box at the bottom, what's more important is the evidence package. This organization, or pharma or life sciences company, was very, very proactive and forward-thinking in understanding what were the elements which will be important to connect the dots and have a robust evidence package for each of the markets, not just the US, but also the ex-US markets. So they put a lot of effort into the phase 3 program, not just from a safety and efficacy perspective, but also from a patient outcomes perspective. A lot of the details within the phase 3 program focused on elements which were important from a patient centricity perspective. And lo and behold, from a phase 3 readout perspective, they lucked out and everything worked out really nicely. They also did a really good job in connecting the dots to surrogate markers, bringing in clinicians, payers, as well as patients into the mix to make sure that the insights were embedded into the evidence package, which was ultimately delivered to have a reimbursable file. So again, just to pull it all together, when you have a robust package which is customized to each of the markets, that's when you facilitate optimal access. Moving on, so we have been in pharma, like I said, for many decades. We've been doing insight work for generations. The typical approach is, the traditional path is to get payer insight, KOL insight, using surveys where you would essentially have typical timelines of 3 to 4 months, but you don't have the ability to clarify questions when you bring in those insights, and you don't have the ability to retest and essentially maybe even go back and have certain waves in the testing process to understand, should there be a change in strategy, right, to understand the insights. So the traditional approaches certainly work well, and in some instances you do have to go and do one-on-one interviews, but a tech-enabled approach via the rapid payer response platform essentially facilitates a lot more agility, very efficient timelines, less than a month, a dynamic way of clarifying questions because you can go back and clarify the questions, and also you can retest the questions, and you'll see that in the example which I'm going to demonstrate. So this tech-enabled approach essentially brings in more efficiency and effectiveness, and hence, provides you the ability to build in stakeholder validation across the entire life cycle of your product. So let's look a little bit into the details in terms of this tech-enabled approach to validate EGPs and components of EGPs. So we'll go anti-clockwise. So in this case, the first is, again, this tech-enabled approach helps you answer questions when you need it. Firstly, you get the responses in less than 5 days. It's a portal which is secure. It's double-blinded, so you have no... 4 minutes. Okay, all right, 4 minutes. It's double-blinded. You have, like I said, I've already spoken about the agility. You have a 1-year credit-based subscription, and then you have the ability to, of course, develop the survey as well as test the survey and get the reports as needed. I'm going to rush a little bit on the case study. So this case study was working with a life sciences company. The indication they were pursuing was agitation in Alzheimer's disease. They wanted to vet the EGP. They wanted to understand the data gaps, and they also wanted to understand how they should be delivering on the evidence. The client chose to work with RPR and Genesis Research. The first question was the cost associated with the institutionalization associated with agitation related to Alzheimer's. And as you can imagine, for those of us who've been in the market access space, you always have to think about the lens which the payer has. From an institutionalization perspective, it was important to know whether all the payers cared about the costs which were incurred related to institutionalization. Now, this is near and dear to my heart because it's a very patient-centric issue, and also you have caregiver burden associated with agitation related to Alzheimer's. Long story short, in this case, we firstly understood that for this cost driver, which is institutionalization, costs associated with institutionalization, is important. Secondly, it was really important to help them understand the elements of costs and the parameters which were important to do a full-blown cost analysis. Once the full-blown cost analysis was done, we were able to go back to the same panel and understand the payer receptivity of the economic burden associated with institutionalization related to agitation in Alzheimer's. Now, you may know that when patients have agitation in Alzheimer's, sometimes they have to be sedated. They have to be sedated using, and I'm going to go straight into the meat of the discussion. So I have to be sedated because and using the standard of care right now, which has a lot of side effects associated with it. So 2 minutes, please. So in this case, what was really important is this sedation being a cost driver, meaning reduction in sedation being a cost driver, was picked up in the peer research in the latter part. So what we were able to do is, firstly, once we understood that this was a cost driver, we were able to go back to the entire panel and get better sense of whether this would truly be a cost driver. So in this case, if you were to think about it, here you have a patient who has Alzheimer's. Agitation related to Alzheimer's results in institutionalization. And if you can decrease the sedation, you have better outcomes from a patient perspective, you have better outcomes from a caregiver perspective, and you have better outcomes from an economic perspective. So in this case, if you think of the big picture, now it's all making sense that reduction in institutionalization and reduction in sedation is truly going to be valued by the payers. So to conclude, firstly, we were able to really bring back the insights to the organization that these two endpoints do matter. And the more important thing is that as a part of this whole process, which is you collectively sitting in one room, talk about the evidence plan, you were able to get cross-functional alignment. So in conclusion, EGPs provide a systematic way of collating the evidence needs across the market. It helps in alignment within the organization, and when executed well with external insights, you are able to make meaningful, positive outcomes from a reimbursability perspective. And stakeholder validation certainly has been done in the past, but when you do stakeholder validation in a more agile fashion, you are able to deliver robust and relevant evidence packages. Lastly, there are other ways to bring in efficiencies when it comes to EGP and development of EGPs. You can dashboard data which is coming out of the real world evidence data sources. You can collate all of this and have platforms which are available to the organization. And so if you need to know more, please stop by and we can tell you more.